What if the first humans realized, long before language or myth existed, that something unseen was following them through every valley, every hunt, every night of absolute darkness? Imagine a world where survival was a constant negotiation with the unknown, where every sound in the tall grass, every flicker of firelight, every shadow stretching across a cave wall whispered that life was more than muscle and instinct. This is where the earliest seed of faith was planted, not through temples or rituals, but through a raw awareness that the invisible was always watching. Picture our primitive ancestors, millions of years ago, living in a landscape where danger and mystery were inseparable. They had no words for spirit, no symbols for gods, no stories to explain why fear tightened their chest when the wind shifted. Yet something inside them stirred, a subtle intuition that their world held forces beyond their grasp. This spark of ancient perception was not philosophy. It was survival. To feel the unseen was to prepare for the unpredictable. To sense a presence was to avoid extinction. Faith did not begin as belief. It began as awareness. As they gathered around a fire that pushed back only a small circle of night, they watched the darkness as if it possessed intention. When a predator moved silently behind the tree line, they felt not only fear, but meaning. When storms tore across the sky, they did not simply hear thunder. They felt addressed. Slowly, the invisible became part of their decisions, their warnings, their moments of courage. It shaped how they moved, where they rested, and how they taught their young to read the world. This silent guide, undefined yet powerful, became the earliest form of spiritual consciousness, long before the first religion took shape. And have you ever felt watched by something you could not name, especially in moments where instinct spoke louder than thought? You might see now that this ancient feeling is older than memory itself. If this beginning resonates with you, share in the comments what part of this idea connects to your own experience. Leave your like to help this exploration reach more people, and check if you are subscribed so you do not miss the deeper layers of what comes next, as we continue unfolding how the unseen shaped the destiny of the first humans, while the story moves forward into even more revealing territory. As the earliest humans continued to navigate a world overflowing with uncertainty, certain patterns began to stand out in ways they could not ignore. The environment itself seemed to communicate through sequences that felt too deliberate to be random. A sudden shift in the wind before the appearance of a predator, the synchronized movement of birds moments before a storm, or the unusual stillness of a forest that often preceded danger. These were not yet interpreted as messages, but they stirred something deep inside, a recognition that the world around them possessed rhythms that demanded attention. For minds still forming the first layers of perception, every recurring sign carried weight, shaping an instinct that bordered on the spiritual. As groups traveled across plains and ancient forests, they observed how certain landscapes evoked specific emotions. A narrow gorge might provoke unease, as if unseen eyes waited beyond the rocks. A high plateau bathed in golden light might induce a feeling of protection, encouraging them to rest and gather strength. Without words, they responded to these sensations, treating the land as if it held intentions, guiding them towards safety or warning them of hidden threats. Over time, this sensitivity sharpened, creating a kind of primitive intuition that helped them interpret reality with greater depth than simple instinct alone. The cycles of nature intensified this awareness. The rising and setting of the sun, the predictable pull of seasons, the migration of animals across vast distances, all revealed a structure that early humans could feel but not yet explain. These predictable patterns offered reassurance, while unexpected disruptions signaled caution. Their survival depended not only on strength or tool-making, but on reading the world accurately, trusting the subtle signs that seemed to emerge from an invisible source. Every omen, every shift in the environment became part of a growing system of meaning that shaped how they behaved and how they imagined the forces surrounding their existence. Even the behavior of their own bodies contributed to this awakening. The sensation of fear before danger appeared, the strange calm that sometimes guided them through uncertainty, or the instinct to flee moments before a threat materialized made them question whether something beyond themselves was whispering through their senses. These moments formed the earliest layers of belief, not in defined deities, but in a living world infused with signals that demanded interpretation. What they were feeling was more than instinct. It was the birth of spiritual perception, an expanding awareness that their lives were intertwined with forces they could sense but never see, pushing them gradually toward a deeper understanding that would continue to evolve as their consciousness expanded into new dimensions of meaning. Fear was one of the earliest teachers of the human mind, a force that shaped perception long before structured belief existed. For our primitive ancestors, fear was not merely an emotion, but a survival mechanism that sharpened awareness and expanded imagination. In the vast silence of prehistoric nights, every rustle in the brush, every distant howl, every flicker of shadow could be a threat. Yet over time, these sensations began to evoke something deeper than immediate danger. Fear pushed them to contemplate what they could not see, what might exist just beyond the reach of their firelight, influencing events without ever revealing itself. As fear blended with curiosity, early humans started to sense patterns within their emotional reactions. There were moments when danger felt present even before any sign appeared, moments when their hearts quickened without reason, or when a sudden calm washed over them despite visible risks. These inner responses suggested that something intangible was communicating through their own bodies. This sparked the belief that unseen forces might be involved in their survival, guiding or warning them through feelings they could not fully understand. Fear became a doorway to speculation, pulling their minds toward the possibility that reality extended far beyond what their senses could measure. In unfamiliar environments, this awareness grew even stronger. Stepping into caves where echoes distorted sound, or walking through forests so dense that light barely touched the ground created sensations of being observed by entities that lived in those hidden spaces. The world felt populated not only by animals and natural phenomena, but by presences that operated in silence, shaping outcomes in unpredictable ways. As their ability to interpret these sensations increased, so did the conviction that the invisible world held power over life and death. This understanding anchored their early attempts to attribute meaning to the unexplainable. Yet fear was not only associated with external threats, it also emerged from within, through dreams that replayed danger, visions that felt too vivid to be random, and emotional surges that arrived without explanation. These internal events suggested that the mind itself was connected to something larger, something capable of sending messages through symbols and sensations. The boundary between the visible and the invisible became increasingly porous, blurring the distinction between the physical world and the realm of imagined forces. This internal landscape became a theater where early humans rehearsed possibilities about their place in the universe. Through this fusion of fear, intuition, and imagination, the earliest foundations of spiritual thought took shape, not as formal worship, but as a raw need to explain why they felt guided or threatened by forces they could not touch. This emerging belief would soon influence their behaviors, their strategies, and eventually the rituals they began to create as they sought protection and meaning in a world that felt alive with unseen intent. As early humans continued to search for meaning in a world filled with uncertainty, their growing awareness of the invisible began to manifest through instinctive actions that would eventually evolve into the earliest rituals. These were not structured ceremonies or intentional acts of worship, but spontaneous responses to the emotional weight of their experiences. When danger passed, they sometimes touched the ground or placed their hands over their chests, gestures that seemed to acknowledge a force beyond themselves. When a hunt was successful, they paused in silence before dividing the food, as if honoring an unseen presence that had allowed them to survive. These simple gestures marked the beginning of a symbolic language that bridged the visible and the invisible. Around the fire, their behaviors grew even more expressive. Flames cast shifting shapes on the walls of caves, and early humans often interpreted these movements as messages or warnings. They traced lines in the dirt, tapped stones together in rhythmic patterns, or repeated specific sounds that made them feel connected to something greater than their small and vulnerable existence. These actions may have been born from instinct, but they soon became habits, repeated not just for comfort, but for the sense of meaning they provided. The repetition transformed fear into order, uncertainty into something they could engage with rather than simply endure. The bodies of their fallen companions also inspired powerful responses. Rather than abandoning the dead to nature, early groups began to cover them with soil, stones, or leaves, actions that hinted at a belief that death required more than physical separation. Something unseen lingered, something that needed to be acknowledged. This emerging behavior suggested that early humans sensed the continuation of presence even when life had ended. The act of burial became one of the earliest expressions of reverence, a silent recognition that the invisible realm had a profound impact on their world. Even nature itself seemed to encourage ritualistic behavior. The return of the sun after a long night, the first rainfall after a harsh drought, or the appearance of a familiar constellation triggered emotional reactions that early humans responded to with movement, sound, or symbolic gestures. Their rituals became a way of negotiating with forces they felt but could not control. Through these acts, they created a fragile bridge between fear and hope, grounding themselves in a world that often felt too vast to comprehend. As these instinctive practices continued to spread within groups, they shaped social bonds and strengthened a shared sense of meaning. Without realizing it, early humans were building the foundations of spiritual tradition, transforming raw emotion into expression and expression into ritual. These actions would soon influence how they taught their young, how they interpreted danger, and how they prepared for the unknown that constantly surrounded them, opening a path that future generations would follow and expand as their understanding deepened over time. If something in this ancient behavior speaks to you, share your thoughts in the comments, letting your own interpretation become part of this evolving exploration of our earliest spiritual origins. As early humans continued to interact with the invisible forces they sensed around them, they began searching for ways to express what could not be spoken. Their minds were evolving, their awareness expanding, yet their world lacked a structured language capable of capturing the depth of these new experiences. Instead, they turned to the tools they did possess: hands that could shape meaning, voices that could carry emotion, and the environment itself, which served as a canvas for their growing spiritual imagination. Through simple gestures, rhythmic sounds, and markings on stone or earth, they crafted the earliest forms of symbolic communication, transmitting messages that resonated far beyond the physical act of creation. A raised hand might signal gratitude for protection felt during the night. A slow circular movement traced in the air might represent something returning, something watching, something guiding. These gestures became part of a shared vocabulary that carried emotional weight long before spoken language emerged. When members of a group repeated the same gesture during a dangerous moment, it strengthened their belief that the invisible was listening. Over time, these actions became more refined, developing patterns that carried meaning from one generation to the next. Sound played an equally essential role. Early humans discovered that specific tones or rhythms could alter their emotional state, calming fear or heightening alertness. They tapped stones together, creating beats that echoed through open plains or deep within caves, feeling as though the environment responded. Some sounds were used to summon courage before a hunt, while others were emitted during moments of loss, expressing grief that words could not yet convey. These sonic expressions became spiritual signatures, each one tied to an emotion, an instinct, or a shared experience that connected the group. Marks carved into stone or traced into the ground also began to appear with increasing frequency. Although simple, these symbols carried intention. A line scratched near a shelter might serve as a reminder of a threat sensed the night before. A spiral etched into a cave wall could represent a path, cycle, or a presence that returned in dreams. These markings were not yet art as we understand it, nor were they attempts to record events. They were attempts to externalize feelings and perceptions that existed between instinct and belief, shaping the earliest visual language of spiritual awareness. As groups traveled, they often encountered marks left by others, and these signs created a strange form of silent communication. Even without understanding their exact meaning, early humans felt a connection to those who came before, as if the marks carried echoes of shared fears, hopes, and intuitions. In this way, the first spiritual messages traveled not through spoken words, but through symbols carved in stone and carried in memory, forming a bridge between individuals, generations, and the unseen world that influenced every part of their existence. These early expressions would soon evolve further, deepening the relationship between the visible and the invisible in ways that shaped the future of human consciousness. As early humans began to interpret the invisible through gestures, sounds, and markings, another powerful sensation emerged: the feeling of being observed. It was not a literal gaze from a living creature, but a deep, intuitive awareness that their actions were noticed by forces beyond the visible. This perception shaped every decision, from where to hunt to when to rest, subtly influencing survival strategies. Even without a name for spirits or gods, early humans responded as though the unseen world was evaluating their choices, and this heightened sensitivity to the invisible became a critical tool for staying alive. The sense of being watched extended beyond immediate threats. When groups approached a dangerous cliff edge or crossed a river with strong currents, there was an instinctive caution that seemed to come from within, yet was too precise to be purely instinct. It was as if an unseen guide whispered warnings through the nervous system, directing attention to hazards before they became lethal. Every movement became a negotiation between the body, the environment, and the unknown. Over time, this heightened awareness allowed early humans to act with foresight, avoiding danger and increasing the survival rate of the group. Social dynamics were also shaped by this perception. Members of a group began to recognize that their actions were observed not only by the invisible forces, but by each other. Cooperation, vigilance, and empathy were reinforced by the sense that behavior mattered on multiple levels. Stealing food, neglecting care for the young, or disregarding a signal from the environment was no longer only an individual risk. It had consequences that resonated across the community. The feeling of being watched amplified accountability, embedding a form of moral awareness that existed before formal rules or codified ethics. Even during rest, the sensation remained active. Nights spent in open areas or caves felt alive with unseen eyes. Fires, shadows, and the movement of wind through leaves were interpreted as silent observers, guiding sleep positions and watch rotations. Early humans began to understand that the invisible was not separate from daily life. It was an integral part of strategy, shaping choices with subtle but undeniable force. Hunting, gathering, nurturing, and teaching all carried a weight of attention from something beyond themselves, instilling caution, respect, and an intuitive sense of timing. This emerging awareness influenced cultural habits as well. Ritualistic pauses, gestures of acknowledgement, and symbolic acts became intertwined with strategy, blending survival with a proto-spiritual understanding. The sense that the invisible was always present created a framework for decision-making that balanced immediate physical needs with long-term social cohesion and protection. In essence, the feeling of being watched acted as both a guardian and a guide, shaping behavior in ways that laid the foundation for belief, faith, and the complex spiritual systems that would follow in human history. In the harsh landscapes that early humans navigated, survival was never purely individual. The instinct to cooperate, to move and act as a group, was reinforced by a subtle but profound awareness that something unseen was observing their actions. This shared perception became a form of silent guidance, shaping behavior and building cohesion within groups. It was not yet formalized belief or organized worship, but a collective understanding that the invisible could influence outcomes, reward cooperation, and punish negligence. In this sense, faith, nascent and undefined, became one of the first tools of social unity. Groups learned to interpret gestures, sounds, and signs not only as messages from the environment, but also as cues for collective action. When a predator approached, the synchronized reactions of members were guided by intuition, shaped by the sense of being watched by forces beyond their comprehension. When food was found or shared, there was a silent acknowledgement, an unspoken gratitude that seemed to flow from something larger than the group itself. These early expressions of faith created trust and reliability, binding individuals together in ways that increased survival and strengthened social ties. Even mundane tasks acquired spiritual significance. The distribution of gathered plants, the marking of safe paths, the maintenance of shelters all became moments where actions were imbued with meaning beyond immediate necessity. The invisible presence they sensed reinforced cooperation, encouraging individuals to act with foresight and care, not only for themselves, but for the entire group. Faith, in this sense, was a stabilizing force, a quiet structure that aligned behavior with survival, intuition with observation, and the seen with the unseen. Stories, gestures, and shared experiences further amplified this unity. Elders and experienced hunters would signal patterns, warnings, or observations in ways that transcended words, relying on intuition, mimicry, and emotional resonance. These early methods of communication reinforced the invisible bonds among the group, creating a shared spiritual framework that guided behavior in silence. Each success, each survival, strengthened the unspoken belief in forces that could not be seen but were undeniably felt. This emerging collective faith influenced the very fabric of early human communities. It reinforced ethical behavior, nurtured empathy, and cultivated resilience in the face of constant uncertainty. Actions were measured not only by immediate practicality, but by their alignment with the unseen order that the group sensed around them. And if this resonates with your own experience of silent guidance or intuition, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments, reflecting on how this invisible sense might have shaped early human connections, letting your perspective become part of this unfolding exploration of faith in the lives of our ancestors. As early humans adapted to the rhythms of their environment, consciousness itself began to evolve in ways that were subtle yet profound. The daily routines of hunting, gathering, and maintaining shelter were imbued with meaning beyond survival, as the awareness of invisible forces influenced perception and decision-making. Simple acts, lighting a fire, arranging stones, or guiding children through the forest, were no longer mere practical necessities. They became rituals shaped by intuition and a growing recognition of patterns, as if the world itself was alive with significance that demanded attention and respect. This emerging consciousness allowed early humans to recognize the interconnectedness of events, the relationships between cause and effect that extended beyond immediate observation. A sudden change in wind, the movement of prey, or the behavior of fellow group members was interpreted with an awareness that something unseen was orchestrating outcomes. These moments of insight were formative, creating a sense of order within chaos and a sense of meaning within unpredictability. The sacred began to emerge not as a separate domain, but as a lens through which every experience could be understood as part of a larger narrative. The rituals and routines that once served purely practical purposes started to take on symbolic resonance. When a hunter returned with food, the act of sharing was accompanied by gestures or sounds that acknowledged forces beyond the group's understanding. When a child successfully navigated a dangerous path, subtle expressions of gratitude or reverence reflected the recognition that survival depended on more than physical skill alone. These ordinary actions became carriers of sacred significance, reinforcing awareness of a reality that existed alongside and beyond the visible. Over time, this evolving consciousness fostered a sense of anticipation and reflection. Early humans learned to pause, observe, and interpret their surroundings with a depth that went beyond immediate survival. The recognition that certain sequences of events, movements of animals, or cycles of the moon had meaning contributed to a proto-scientific awareness intertwined with spiritual perception. The sacred was woven into everyday life, present in the repetition of patterns, in the alignment of actions with environmental cues, and in the cultivation of a mindset attuned to forces beyond comprehension. Through these routines, early humans began to internalize principles that would shape future generations. They recognized that life was a dialogue between visible actions and invisible responses, between instinct and intuition, between survival and reverence. The sacred emerged quietly, integrated into the flow of daily life, guiding choices, reinforcing cooperation, and shaping the mind toward a greater awareness. In this way, the evolution of consciousness created a foundation for complex belief systems, embedding spirituality into the fabric of ordinary existence and setting the stage for the profound developments that would follow as humanity expanded its understanding of the invisible forces that influenced every aspect of life. The subtle awareness of invisible forces and the early practices that arose from it did not remain confined to momentary experiences. They shaped the very architecture of the human mind over generations. Early humans, through repeated observation, ritual, and interpretation, began to build cognitive patterns that reinforced attention, memory, and social intelligence. The experiences that involved sensing the unseen, interpreting signs, and acting in accordance with them created mental pathways that enhanced problem-solving, foresight, and the ability to predict outcomes, a foundation for reasoning that persists in modern humans today. These ancestral practices also strengthen the capacity for empathy and cooperation. By responding to subtle cues from the environment and from each other, early humans learned to navigate not only physical dangers, but also social dynamics. The same sensitivity that allowed them to interpret invisible forces also enabled them to read emotions, anticipate actions, and act with consideration for others. This dual function, responding to both natural and social signals, embedded a form of intuitive, intelligence that would become a hallmark of the species, supporting complex social structures and the eventual emergence of culture. Moreover, the symbolic acts, whether gestures, markings, or sounds, contributed to the development of abstract thinking. Translating experience into symbolic representation required a level of mental flexibility and imagination that went far beyond immediate survival. It allowed humans to plan, to anticipate the unseen, and to communicate complex concepts within the group. These cognitive advancements were intertwined with the spiritual dimension, creating a synergy between awareness of the invisible and the capacity for reflection, storytelling, and learning. Over time, the mind began to recognize patterns not only in physical phenomena but also in abstract relationships, laying the groundwork for myth, philosophy, and eventually organized religion. The sense of being observed, of interacting with forces beyond immediate comprehension, continued to reinforce cautious yet creative behavior. Decisions were informed by awareness that extended beyond immediate perception, shaping strategies that enhanced survival and social cohesion. This internalization of the unseen cultivated patience, adaptability, and the ability to navigate uncertainty with a sense of order. The human brain, still forming structures for attention, memory, and foresight, was effectively trained to interpret signals that were simultaneously environmental, social, and spiritual, a multidimensional skill set unique to the species. Ultimately, the legacy of ancestral spirituality persisted in subtle ways, influencing how humans perceive risk, interpret meaning, and relate to each other and to the world around them. The mind evolved to balance the tangible with the intangible, combining instinct with intuition, observation with imagination. These cognitive and emotional foundations, rooted in the earliest forms of spiritual awareness, shaped the trajectory of human thought, creativity, and culture. Every decision, every insight, every act of collaboration carried echoes of these early experiences, forming a bridge between the unseen forces that guided the first humans and the modern consciousness that continues to seek connection with the invisible, the sacred, and the extraordinary. Even after millions of years, the echoes of early human faith continue to resonate within us, subtly influencing thoughts, behaviors, and perceptions. The invisible, forces that guided our ancestors, shaping every decision, every gesture, and every ritual, left traces in the very structure of the human mind. We may no longer rely on instinct alone to survive, yet the awareness of unseen patterns, the ability to sense meaning beyond the visible, and the inclination to honor something greater than ourselves remain deeply ingrained. Modern humans carry an inherited sensitivity to what cannot be seen, a silent guide that shapes intuition, morality, and creativity in ways often overlooked but profoundly influential. Our daily lives are filled with reminders of this legacy, moments of reflection, sudden insights, feelings of awe in nature, and the subtle recognition that our actions ripple beyond immediate perception all echo the earliest spiritual experiences. The structures built by primitive rituals, gestures, and shared awareness laid the foundation for complex cultural systems, social cohesion, and ethical frameworks. Even without conscious awareness, we navigate the world guided by cognitive patterns forged millions of years ago, patterns rooted in observation, interpretation, and the interaction with the invisible forces that once determined life or death. Understanding this invisible inheritance allows us to see human behavior through a new lens. Fear, intuition, empathy, and reverence are not merely emotional responses. They are continuations of a sophisticated survival strategy shaped by spiritual perception. The rituals we maintain, the symbols we create, and the beliefs we carry reflect a timeless connection to ancestors who sensed more than they could explain. Recognizing this connection enriches our appreciation for the depth of human consciousness and highlights the ways the unseen continues to shape our decisions, relationships, and worldview. If you have followed this journey through the unseen landscapes of our ancestors, take a moment to leave a comment with the phrase, "I am connected," showing that you engaged with the story of faith that transcends time. Like the video if you felt the resonance of these ancient experiences, and make sure you are subscribed so you continue exploring the hidden forces that influence humanity even today. There is another video here that delves deeper into the mysteries of how ancient awareness shaped our evolution, so click and continue the journey, discovering more of the invisible threads that connect us to the first humans, their rituals, and their enduring legacy.